Alright gang, how can we maximally improve the world? First I'm going to do a bit about intelligence, and then I'll move on. Hopefully I can give some practical steps here. So a bit about intelligence. I'm going to give a series of definitions provided by the leading authorities in the field. This is 100 plus years of research. I'm going to try and keep this brief, though I am going to be doing a lot of reading. This is a quote from John B. Watson in 1930. He says, "Give me a dozen healthy infants, well-formed, and my own specified world to bring them up in, and I'll guarantee to take anyone at random and train him to become any type of specialist I might select. Doctor, lawyer, artist, regardless of his talents, penchants, tendencies, abilities, vocations, and race of his ancestors." This is the part of the quote that's often left off at the end. "I'm going beyond my facts, and I admit it. But so have the advocates of the contrary, and they have been doing it for many thousands of years." This one's from Rushton and Jensen, 2005. "Denial of any genetic component in human variation, including between groups, is not only poor science, it is likely to be injurious both to unique individuals and to the complex structure of societies." End quote. This is Plucker and Esping, 2013. "Differences in measured intelligence exist between groups based on gender, race, and other demographic characteristics. The differences tend to emerge even on culture-fair tests of intelligence." This is from Tofi et al., 2016. They conducted a meta-analysis assessing the effect of cognitive abilities on antisocial behavior, which included 15 prospective studies spanning 6 different countries. The results of the meta-analysis indicated that cognitive abilities were associated with subsequent antisocial behavior, where individuals with lower IQ scores had a higher probability of offending than individuals with higher IQ scores. Furthermore, cognitive abilities functioned as a protective factor attenuating the effects of adverse environmental conditions. Examples given: parental separation, deleterious rearing environments, and poor housing. So, smarter people, smarter as measured by general intelligence. Those people are going to be, in a way, insulated against harmful factors in their childhood. The ones they gave are just a few examples here. The majority of studies have found IQ differences between offenders and non-offenders. This is from Ellis and Walsh, 2003. On average, the IQ for chronic juvenile offenders is 92, about half a standard deviation below the population mean. For chronic adult offenders, however, the average IQ is 85, one standard deviation below the population mean. A study of Texas inmates who entered the prison system in 2002 indicated approximately 23% of the inmates scored below 80. Almost 69% scored between 80 and 109, and only 9.6% scored above 110. Again, Ellis and Walsh, 2003. So, the prison population is made up of people who are lower in intelligence than the average. I forget whose hypothesis this was. It's pretty famous within psychology. You learn this in Psych 100, the frustration aggression hypothesis. So aggression is a result of frustration. You can see this with kids, you can see it with adults, you can see it with yourself. You're trying to accomplish a task, you become frustrated with that task, and then that frustration leads to aggression. You throw the thing against the wall, or you hit somebody, or you see kids wrestling over something and one of them initiates force against the other. So here are a few examples of the impact of IQ among white guys, so I avoid offending anyone. Of those with IQs above 125, 2% had a child out of wedlock, compared to 32% of those with IQs less than 75. Only 2% with high IQs live in poverty, compared to 30% with IQs less than 75. The percentage of high school dropouts is 55% for IQs under 75, 35% for IQs from 75 to 90, 6% for the mid-range between 90 and 110, and 0.4% for IQs from 100 to 125, and 0% for IQs above 125. Mid-range IQs had the most likelihood of being married before age 30. Those with high IQs, meaning above 125, are less likely to be married by age 30. than those with the lowest IQs. White men with the highest IQs are the least likely to be incarcerated at 0%, but for IQs under 75 it jumps to 7%. That's from Wells, 2018. Schwartz and Beaver, 2018. Lower levels of cognitive abilities were associated with an increased likelihood of being arrested earlier, even after controlling for criminality, impulsivity, and socioeconomic status. So a common objection when you talk about IQ and crime is that, well, it's not IQ, it's socioeconomic status. Crime is correlated with poverty. Okay, was it the chicken or the egg? Here's a bit about childhood trauma. This is from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, 2019. Exposure to violence in childhood increases the risks of injury, future violence, victimization and perpetration, substance abuse, sexually transmitted infections, delayed brain development, reproductive health problems, involvement in sex trafficking, non-communicable diseases, lower educational attainment, and limited employment opportunities. This is from Ferguson, 2013. Spanking has a negative effect on cognitive performance. This is Simons and Wirtle, 2010. Findings supported an intergenerational cycle of violence. Parents who experienced frequent corporal punishment during childhood perceived its use as acceptable and frequently spanked their children. These children, in turn, advocated that spanking be used as a disciplinary method and preferred aggressive conflict resolution strategies with peers and siblings. These findings support an additional, quote, side effect of spanking, end quote. When parents use corporal punishment, it teaches their children that hitting is an acceptable means of dealing with conflict, frustration, aggression. Current meta-analysis conducted by Ferguson, 2013, and Gershoff and Grogan-Kaler, 2016, found that spanking does not lead to improved child behavior, but instead is associated with increased risk for detrimental outcomes across the sample of white, black, Latino, and Asian American children. Nevertheless, studies have found black parents to be more likely than white parents to utilize spanking. This is Bradley et al., 2001, Slade and Wisso, 2004. Side note, these names and dates, if you're not familiar with APA format, I'm giving the name of the author and the year that the study was published. And these are all direct quotes from these studies. I haven't put any of my own words in these things. So if you have access to a library that gives you access to scholarly works, you might be able to get some of these on Google Scholar. If you can't, sorry about it. You can pay for access. Cassia, Plessy, Anna, Long, and Kelly, 2018. Black mothers are more likely to employ physical violence and pharmacological interventions to influence the behavior of their children and to view these as more favorable solutions than response cost or positive reinforcement than white mothers. This is Spillane Greco, 2000. Teenagers who were considered status offenders and criminal offenders were randomly matched to a group of teenage non-offenders for sex, ethnicity, and family structure. These teens rated themselves for aggression, both physical and verbal. They gave their perceptions of physical and verbal aggression between their parents and between the parents and themselves. Substance abuse, runaway behavior, and elements of teenage culture such as movies, music, and videos were also compared between the two groups. The offenders reported extreme use of verbal abuse in their families that did not exist for the non-offenders. The teens in the offender group were much more physically aggressive compared to their parents and to the teens and parents in the non-offender group. This is from Turner, Finkelor, and Ormrod. Youth from single-parent and step families experienced higher rates of several kinds of victimization compared with youth living with two biological parents. Youth in step families had the highest overall rates of victimization and the greatest risk from family perpetrators, including biological parents, siblings, and step-parents. Elevated risk in step families was fully explained by their higher levels of family problems. Victimization risk in single-parent families was affected more by the lower socioeconomic status and residence in more violent neighborhoods and schools. This is from Adams, Mrug, and Knight, 2018. Sexual, physical, and verbal abuse in childhood or adolescence are associated with all forms for psychopathy. Bryant, 1993, 85% of students surveyed reported experiencing sexual harassment as part of the Board of Directors for the American Association of University Women, AAUW, Educational Foundation's 10-year study. From 2011 to 2015, about 17,000 sexual assaults were committed by U.S. students, the Associated Press found, although the number is likely much higher because assaults are underreported or mislabeled as bullying, particularly among young victims. About 5% of the victims AP reported on were 5 and 6-year-olds. That's from Long, 2017. Swire, 2015. In U.S. schools last year, 2014, almost 800 school employees were prosecuted for sexual assault, nearly 1/3 of them women. And I think I noted it a moment ago, it's important to keep in mind that these things are underreported. They, especially among children or people who are vulnerable, you could say. If your life depends on your parents, your life depends on someone else, you're a captive, let's say. Okay, a note on circumcision. Circumcision was designed and implemented to permanently and irreversibly damage sexuality by inflicting pain on the genitals. There's a whole presentation on this by a guy named Klopper, Clopper, that was released in 2017. You can find it on YouTube. It's about 2 hours. Very, very informative and sourced. So, takeaway. Ensuring the well-being of our children is a collective responsibility. Protecting children from abuse, providing adequate nutrition, and two-parent households free from verbal or physical aggression with adequate nutrition will maximally improve our society. Two-parent households are safer than single-parent households. Verbal and physical abuse, including spanking and yelling, are detrimental. Environmental toxins in the air, just air pollution, lots of noise, lots of light when they're sleeping, even in utero, verbal violence between, say, the mother and the father, or mother and a non-biological male in the home, causes histone methylation that prevents DNA from being transcribed. So what you're doing is making a genetic modification to a child that's going to be passed along. These trends are heritable. Circumcision is unnecessary physical violence and should be limited to consenting adults. This should not be inflicted upon young men or young women at any age because it's barbaric and it is what would you call it? It's a blood sacrifice. It's a ritual to associate sex with pain, and it's inflicted upon children without their consent, and we do it rampantly. Adequate nutrition and physical and emotional safety are essential in maximizing general intelligence, which predicts a variety of life outcomes. Conclusion. Action is needed to improve our society, and the most effective way to do this is to improve the lives of children from conception to adulthood. Adequate nutrition, physical and emotional safety, and reasoning are the best way to improve the lives of children. Our focus should be on encouraging intact families with peaceful, two-parent households, protection from violence outside the home, and and improved nutrition to maximize general intelligence. We should discourage psychopharmacological interventions when less invasive treatments are available. ADHD medications, antidepressants, SSRIs, etc. We can accomplish this voluntarily while reducing our environmental impact with tax deductions for intact families, homeschooling, and subsistence farming. Additional improvements can be made through collective voluntary education about the impact of adverse childhood experiences such as spanking, yelling, genital mutilation, and maternal malnutrition. Our culture of the present, of materialism and instant gratification, must be dismantled without force in favor of a culture focused on the future. I welcome your comments and suggestions for voluntary solutions to these problems. I look forward to hearing about it. We will